It wasn't a long message, just a few lines. No accusations, no begging, no dramatic punctuation. Only truth, quiet, composed, and devastating in its clarity. You didn't send it to get a reply. You sent it to set yourself free. But what you didn't expect was how the silence that followed said more than any reply ever could. Because somewhere on the other side of that unread text, someone was reading it. Again, and again, and again. Avoidants don't scream when they're in pain. They don't chase. They don't confess. They retreat into silence, into detachment, into their carefully controlled emotional vault. But the truth is, that vault isn't locked. It's echoing. And your words, the ones you almost didn't send, they echo in there like thunder. You see, the message they can't unread isn't loud. It's not angry. It's not manipulative. It's precisely because it's calm that it cuts through their walls. It says, I saw you. I cared. But I can't stay where I'm not met. And that's what haunts them. Not because you were cruel, but because you weren't. They expected chaos. They expected you to plead, argue, self-destruct. Because that would justify their flight. That would affirm the story they've always told themselves. Love is too much. People always need more than I can give. But your message didn't play into that. It simply told the truth. And truth, when someone's been running from it their whole life, is a form of confrontation they can't defend against. So why do they replay it in silence? Why do those simple words return to them in the quiet hours, in the shower, in traffic, in the half-sleep just before morning? It's not guilt alone. It's recognition. A part of them knew you were real. And the other part, the louder, wounded part, was terrified of that. Because if you were real, then they let go of something they'll never find again. So no, you didn't lose. You woke something up in them. And now they sit with it, without a roadmap, without a voice, reading a message that wasn't meant to haunt, but does. Now ask yourself, what kind of love needs to be lost before it's understood? The hidden psychology of avoidant attachment. They weren't born this way. No one is. Avoidant attachment is not a choice. It's a strategy, a survival blueprint, quietly inked into the nervous system by experiences too painful, too confusing, and too early to understand. Somewhere in their childhood, love became conditional. Safety came with strings attached, and the people who were supposed to protect them felt intrusive, overwhelming, or absent. So they learned. They learned that expressing needs led to disappointment, that showing vulnerability invited chaos, that the more they felt, the more they lost control. And so they made a subconscious vow. I will not need. I will not depend. I will stay safe by staying distant. This vow wasn't written in words. It was etched in moments. A parent pulling away when they cried. Praise given only when they performed. Affection laced with obligation. A love that said, I care about you, but only when you make me comfortable. Over time, this child became emotionally self-sufficient. They stopped asking for reassurance. They flinched from intimacy, even as they craved it. And they began to equate closeness with danger. Fast forward to adulthood, and they're still playing the same script. But now it's in their relationships. You felt it, didn't you? That sudden withdrawal after things got too close. The way they downplayed your connection, even when their eyes said something else. The mixed signals, the ghosting, the aloofness wrapped in charm. They weren't lying. They were splitting, internally torn between the part that longs to be seen and the part that fears annihilation if they are. To them, your emotional openness felt like a tidal wave, not because you were overwhelming, but because they've spent their entire life building dams to keep that kind of feeling out. And yet, when you sent that message, that clear, composed reflection of love without demand. Something short-circuited in their internal defense. Because here's the paradox of the avoidant. They want intimacy, but the very thing they want feels dangerous. They crave closeness, but closeness threatens the fragile independence that once kept them safe. So when love arrives, real, soft, and unflinching, it terrifies them. That's why they leave. Not because you were too much, but because you were enough. Enough to stir the very feelings they've locked away. Enough to mirror back a version of love they never thought they deserved. Enough to expose how lonely their emotional fortress really is. And now, after you've walked away, they're left with a truth they can't unfeel. Avoidant attachment doesn't erase emotion. It delays it, suppresses it, stores it in the nervous system like a ticking clock. So they replay the message. They rationalize. They try to numb. But every word you wrote reminds them. This was real, and I ran. But what do they do with that realization? That's the part their attachment style never prepared them for. Because avoidance was always about escape, not repair. And now, haunted by your silence, by your message, by the echo of what could have been, they're left staring into the very shadow they've spent their whole life outrunning. A shadow that whispers, "You abandoned gold for dust." How avoidance destroys from within. They thought the silence would bring them peace. That after you stopped reaching out, after the thread of intimacy had faded, they'd feel light again, free, in control. But silence is a funny thing. When it's real, when it's final, when it's chosen by the one who once waited with an open heart, it doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like a reckoning. Avoidants don't fall apart when you're there. They fall apart when you're gone. Because when you're present, they can blame the pressure, the expectations, the closeness. They can convince themselves that you were the problem. But when you go silent, genuinely silent, their excuses collapse. And all they're left with is the truth that it wasn't your intensity. It wasn't your love. It wasn't your needs. It was their fear of being known. That ruined everything. So now they scroll through old messages, not to reconnect, but to relive the moments where love once lived, and to punish themselves with what they could not accept. They replay your words in their mind like a ghost film, studying the lines, the tone, the timing, trying to decode where it all slipped through their fingers. But here's the brutal reality. It slipped because they let go, because their subconscious still believes it's safer to be lonely than to be seen. But the body disagrees. The nervous system doesn't lie, and avoidance always exacts its cost. It starts subtly, a restlessness they can't explain, a gnawing sense that something precious was lost. They throw themselves into distractions, work, sex, independence, but none of it quiets the inner tension, because avoidance isn't peace. It's a prolonged anxiety dressed up as control. And the more they avoid, the louder the shadow becomes. The shadow you awaken with your message. The shadow that now whispers at 2 a.m. when the room goes still. You pushed away the only person who saw you. Regret hits the avoidant in slow motion. At first, they tell themselves they made the right choice, that things would have never worked, that you were too emotional, too much, too intense. But emotional distance doesn't erase memory. It preserves it, like an unopened letter they're too afraid to read, yet too haunted to throw away. And now, your message lingers, not because of what it said, but because of what it didn't demand. You didn't beg. You didn't plead. You simply spoke your truth. And then, you vanished. That is what haunts them. Avoidants expect confrontation. They expect drama. They expect to be chased, because that gives them permission to keep running. But when you stopped chasing, you broke the loop. And now they're stuck with emotions they can't numb, with memories they can't rewrite, with a version of you they can't replace. Because now, no one else speaks the language of their shadow the way you did. No one else touched the parts of them they pretend don't exist. No one else made them feel both seen and safe. And so they keep replaying that message, not to reconnect, but because in a world full of shallow gestures and masked interactions, that message was real. But here's the most agonizing truth of all. They won't reach out, not because they don't care, but because their entire identity was built around not needing anyone. To reach out would mean admitting they were wrong, admitting they do feel, that they did care, that they still do. And for the avoidant ego, that kind of surrender feels like death. So instead, they suffer in silence, privately tormented by the very independence they once protected like armor. And your message? It becomes a mirror, one they can't look away from, one they can't unsee, one they can't unread, because deep down they know you didn't leave to punish them, you left to save yourself. And nothing is more devastating to someone who thought they'd always have the upper hand than realizing they lost the one person who loved them without needing to control them. How to break free from the avoidance hold. There's a moment when the ache turns into clarity, when the tears no longer beg them to return, but instead baptize you into a deeper truth. You were never meant to beg for love, never meant to shrink yourself into someone's limited capacity for connection, never meant to decode mixed signals just to feel worthy. And this is the rebellion, because healing from an avoidant isn't about getting closure. It's about shattering the belief that you were ever unlovable in the first place. You see, their inability to receive your love wasn't proof that you were too much. It was evidence that they were too defended. And yet, for so long, you blamed yourself. If only you had said less, needed less, held back more, maybe then they would have stayed. But love that requires self-erasure isn't love. It's emotional starvation wrapped in codependency. So you reclaim your voice, not by yelling, not by proving, not by demanding an apology, but by finally understanding that your presence was the gift, your tenderness was the miracle, your willingness to stay open in the face of their walls was courage, not weakness. You break free by refusing to internalize their rejection as your reflection, because you could have stayed trapped in that loop forever, waiting for their realization, waiting for the apology that never comes, waiting for the silence to end. But the rebellion begins when you stop waiting, when you stop looking at the door, hoping they'll walk back through it, and start building the life they were never ready to meet you in. It's not easy. There will be days when the ghost of what could have been still follows you, when your mind replays the softness you gave and the distance you got in return. But healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. It's looking back at the moment they turned away and no longer blaming yourself for not being more lovable. It's finally seeing their avoidance for what it really was. A trauma response, a fear of intimacy, a subconscious protection against being seen. And suddenly, you no longer envy them. You pity them, not with arrogance, but with understanding. Because you see it now, how lonely it must be to fear the very thing that could set you free. So you choose differently. You no longer confuse inconsistency with passion. You no longer feel butterflies when someone withholds affection. You no longer chase people who make you earn their crumbs, because you've tasted what it means to overextend. And now you crave something else. Reciprocity, safety, love that doesn't hide behind silence or shame. And one day, as you rise into this new version of yourself, you'll feel the pull to send one more message. just to see if they finally understand, if they've done the work, if the silence broke them open instead of shut them down. But you'll pause, you'll sit with that impulse, and you'll realize that reaching back would only anchor you to the very pain you've outgrown. So instead, you'll write a new kind of message, but not to them. You'll write it to your inner child, the part of you that kept trying to earn love from the emotionally absent. And you'll say, I see you now. I hear you. You don't have to perform for love anymore. That is the message that matters, not the one they ignored, not the one they still replay, but the one you finally give yourself. Because freedom isn't when they realize what they lost. It's when you finally realize what you deserve, why their shadow still haunts them. You walked away in silence, but the echo of your love never did. And now, something peculiar is happening, not outside them, but within, in the place they worked so hard to keep locked. That shadow they avoided by avoiding you. It's growing restless, because the truth always catches up, even to those who pretend not to care, especially to those who suppress their guilt, deny their fear, and rewrite the story to paint themselves blameless. But shadows don't vanish with time. They fester in silence. They whisper in moments of stillness. They flood back in the exact tone of your voice, the rhythm of your laughter, the softness they once called too much. And they replay it, the message they never responded to, the one where you opened your soul and asked nothing in return. It wasn't the words that haunted them. It was the mirror it held up, that reflection of someone who was still emotionally frozen, while you, despite the ache, chose love anyway. At first, they told themselves you were dramatic, too intense, too sensitive. They even felt relieved when you finally walked. They mistook their numbing for peace. But time has a cruel way of stripping away the justifications. And now, they hear your silence louder than they ever heard your presence. They check your page, wondering if you've forgotten. They remember details they once pretended not to notice. They tell new partners they're working on themselves, but can't quite explain the eyes they can't forget. It's not obsession. It's not regret in the romantic sense. It's the haunting realization that they abandoned gold for dust, and now they're choking on it. Because deep down, they knew, even while pushing you away, even while playing hot and cold, even while dismissing your needs, they knew they were loved, and they knew they couldn't return it. That is the pain that keeps them up at night. Not your departure, but your purity, the clarity of your love, the simplicity of what you offered. They can't explain it to others, so they bury it, try to outrun it, distract themselves with noise, bodies, and dopamine. But here's what no one tells them. You don't heal from someone you hurt by forgetting them. You heal by facing the parts of yourself that made you hurt them in the first place. And until they do, the shadow will follow them, not as punishment, but as a reminder. You were real. And as for you, you no longer seek validation in their pain. You don't need to know how often they replay your words, because you've stepped out of their emotional labyrinth and into the light of your own becoming. You're building a life rooted in mutuality, in safety, in depth. You're no longer attracted to what wounds you, because you've finally fallen in love with what heals you. And if this message found you at a moment when you were still looking back, let this be your sign to look forward, to return to yourself, to stop editing your needs to be more digestible, to stop romanticizing people who ghosted your humanity. There is a love that won't run, that won't freeze when you get vulnerable, that won't make you prove your worth. But to receive it, you have to become the version of you who no longer tolerates emotional starvation. That version is waiting on the other side of your silence. So if this spoke to your inner truth, don't just keep it in your head. Let it live in the comments. Share the line that broke you open. The moment you realized you deserved more. Because when you speak it, you solidify it. And you never know. Your words might be the very thing someone else needed to finally break free.